Hi, everyone, and welcome to our research reels for September. My name is Dana Almagar, and I'll be your host today. So today's research reels is entitled Clinical Trials Initiations, and today we have Stella Park enlightening us with some knowledge. Stella holds a regional role with a mission to promote high-performing culture of research quality in the Horizon research community by leading research quality assurance, auditing, and providing education and training opportunities. Stella has been working in the world of clinical research for over 10 years and has built hands-on experience and knowledge of coordinating and managing all phases of clinical trials. She worked several years for a contract research organization in Toronto and for a clinical trials office at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. Stella holds a Bachelor of Science honors in biology from Queen's University, as well as a postgraduate diploma in pharmaceutical research and development technology. So welcome, Stella, and thanks for taking some time out of your evening to present to us today. And just so you guys know, so questions will be welcomed at the end of the session. And if you submitted a question and you're not here today, I will ask those on your behalf if Stella doesn't answer them during her presentation. And without further ado, take it away, Stella.
Okay, thank you, Dana. Thanks for everyone for this opportunity. So I'm just going to start my slide. Sorry about that. So yeah, thanks for this opportunity again. And it is my pleasure, obviously, to have this opportunity to virtually meet all of you and talk about this interesting topic. Today, as you know, we're delving into the topic of clinical trials initiation, and sort of kick off our session. I want to start the session by sharing this popular phrase that says, well begun is half done. I'm sure you probably have heard of it somewhere. It is often attributed to the Aristotle, and although there are some debate about, the origin of this phrase, saying that it is not direct word from him, maybe slightly different wording, original. Nevertheless, I think the essence of this saying is that it emphasizes the value of a solid start and importance of a strong beginning when pursuing any task or endeavor. And he believed that a well-planned beginning could set the stage for a successful outcome. And if you were to ask me, what is the key take-home message that you wish to emphasize in today's session, would be that is exactly this: that by ensuring well-planned study initiation process right from the start, you will reduce the likelihood of encountering difficulties or obstacles, and consequently, your overall experience in study execution and management will be much more smoother and likely to produce positive outcome. And when I say positive outcome, I am specifically alluding to the point of obtaining reliable research data while safeguarding the rights and well-being of the participant, and all in full compliance with applicable regulatory, ethical, and privacy standards. So at the end of today's session, I really hope that you will have a clear understanding of the various stages and steps of the clinical trial initiation processes and importance of each step. And also hope that you will be able to have a distinction between site level feasibility reviews and those conducted by sponsors. Most importantly, I hope to emphasize the significance of early study planning and how thorough preparation can pave the way for a successful trial outcome. So let's begin with a question. What is your perspective on the process of a study activation, study initiation? Whether you are a research coordinator, research assistant, or even an investigator, what are your anticipations and ideals regarding the commencement of a new research study? So here's two typical scenario that I often come across in my workplace, and they usually go something like this. So I get a call from a researcher or research nurse who informs me about this really exciting research opportunity that is coming from another academic or teaching hospital. They mentioned that they have this been invited to this participate in this multi-site national or international level clinical research project. That their initial question that I get is that when is the next RB submission deadline, and how should I go about submitting the study for local approval? Or in another case, we have a clinician calls me and says, he or she has this new study proposal from one of their former colleagues. They used to work together, and that the person has agreed to take part, and then asked me, so I agreed to do this study. The sponsor, let's say Hamilton Health Science, says that they would do my ethics submission for me, so I don't have to worry about any of the paperwork. So I'm not sure if any of these scenarios can actually, maybe bring someone in your thought. Or, as you can imagine, I often, find myself in a position sort of delivering less than favorable news, saying that, I understand that your enthusiasm, but do you have research staff available to coordinate and manage your research activities? Do you have you received a copy of a confidential agreement or and have sent a document over to our contract office for review? And I would tell them that, I understand your enthusiasm, but there are steps, several steps, and several things to be reviewed and considered before jumping into ethics application submission. So, and then, of course, that's not the answer that people were expecting. They might say that, this is really simple study. I think you're complicating the process. Or, I know these guys, so, we can trust it. So sometimes, I really wish that I had that superpower that, sort of like instantly kickstart all the studies and just kind of, call a day or something. But the reality is quite different because the real world of a clinical trials is a complicated, time consuming, labor intensive process that require involvement of numerous stakeholders that work together under strict regulations, standards, and guidelines. So we, as you can see, this complicated flow chart or flow map, the regulatory agencies, you have Health Canada or FDA. We also have a sponsor who's a pharmaceutical company oftentimes, has a responsibility for overall clinical trial activities. And we also have a site lead, also known as principal investigator, who's responsible for the conduct of all the activities that are happening in the site level. And we have a research ethics board who oversee activities to protect participant rights and safety. And to make things even more interesting, it appears that not every clinical trials are not activated in the same manner, that there is such wide variety of process differences as to how research studies are activated from one institution to another, and also from one type of study to another as well. So as you can see, this really complicated slide here. I wouldn't expect you to read that because the font is very small. The journey of this drug development really is a complicated and long journey. It encompasses a multifaceted, lengthy process that unfolds over several years. It includes drug discovery, non-clinical testing, clinical development phase that which stretches out of from phase 1 all the way to phase 3, and then we have post-approval studies, which is also known as phase 4. So clinical trials may take, I would say, as short as 2 to 3 years. But I would say for most cases, it's a lot more than 3 years actually to complete. And the regulatory review itself takes a couple of years. So they say that overall, on average, successful launch of the new medicine takes an average of 10 to 15 years from compound identification stage. So it takes a long time and a lot of money is being invested. And on top of all this, we have patients, many patients eagerly waiting and needing new medicine to better their condition. And time is of the essence, as you can see here, and it really is a serious business. And there is no time to be wasted here. So now that I sort of hopefully kind of explained to you why this is important and it's such a complicated, long journey, that maybe it appears that clinical trial is not as simple as we hope that it would be, that it involves quite a process that requires comprehensive planning and involvement of multiple players. So as you can see here, I sort of listed some of the really frequently asked questions with respect to trial initiation. So what are the crucial first steps to ensure the successful study initiation? What are the hardest part of the starting clinical trial? How can we translate the knowledge of a trial into practice? What are the most important factors to consider when bringing a new patient? How can you reduce the number of dropouts in a trial? My short answer to all of these questions here is planning. So I believe that study planning is arguably the very first and also the most challenging and resource intensive step in the entire clinical trial procedure. So throughout the remainder of the session, I want to walk you through that typical trial initiation steps and offer some general advice and tips that could be beneficial when you're planning your own study. I would like to take you all the way back to the time when you were first introduced to a new research project. So there are various ways through which you might discover a new research opportunity. So it might be that a pharmaceutical company or a CRO, so contract research organization, might approach you with a clinical trial or a project, bringing a new medicine, new drug, or targeting certain patient population. Or a former colleague of yours from another institution might be working in a research that piques your interest. So once you have that initial contact, it is always a good idea to ask for a document called CDA or NDA. So CDA stands for Confidentiality Disclosure Agreement or Non-Disclosure Agreement. And these documents serve several critical purposes. And it is important that you have that established before getting into any specific discussion about the study. So, as you know, clinical trials often involve new innovations, medical interventions, therapies, or new drugs. So, the specifics about these interventions are typically proprietary to the sponsor. And CDA ensures that these details are not disclosed to unauthorized individuals or entities. So the CDA sets the boundaries for information use. Also, it allows early discussion with the potential partners. Um, Without having to, allows them to share sensitive information that they wouldn't be sharing otherwise. So our contract budget manager at Horizon reviews all incoming CDAs or NDAs and makes sure that the language in agreement is consistent with the requirements of our institution. So this process ensures that the investigator, research team members can safely share certain site information, and also the sponsor can share their information using a document called a protocol. So when you receive a protocol, you also get a form called something along the line of feasibility or site information form. So the feasibility form, it asks you a specific questions that relates to your capability to function as a site. It asks you about your patient population, perhaps it's something about your availability to conduct a study, or they want to see if you have any of a specific equipment or device or certain technology that you know that is required to run that particular study, that they can, it's worth for them, there's a value for them to bring their trial and invest their time and money to activate the study on your site. If you happen to be a relatively new investigator or researcher with no prior experience in clinical trials, chances are the sponsor would request something called SQV or PTA. It is called site qualification visit or pre-trial assessment. So this assessment is carried out, could be either virtually or in-person setting. The purpose of that visit is to determine whether your site is equipped to handle their study, so gauging factors like your site experience, expertise, available resource and timeline, and etc. So, I have sort of explained to you a sort of quick overview of a site selection process from the sponsor's viewpoint. Now I kind of sort of want to shift our attention to the site level. So from the standpoint of the site investigator and research team, what are some of the crucial factors and key points that we need to keep in mind when evaluating choosing a new study? So, first of all, I believe that it would be much more effective if you could sort of set up a standardized internal procedure for your team to evaluate a new study. So, who's receiving and reviewing the protocol? Is there a certain checklist or site level assessment form that you could use to review the protocol? What are some of the unique things about your research team that you should always keep in mind when bringing a new trier? Is there a certain department or unit in a hospital that you should really inquire even before considering a new study? If your research team, let's say, is comprised of one or two investigator, rather a small group, you have a one research coordinator who works part-time basis, only works a few days a week. So if that's the case, can this team um, adopt or bring a trial that requires such a strict timeline when it comes to screening process? These are the specific things that you really need to discuss as a group. Another one important aspect that I really would like to highlight here is that the sponsor's evaluation of your site shouldn't be the sole determinant in your decision to participate in a clinical trial. The reality is that sponsors only see the information that you provide to them. They are not necessarily privy to the intricate workings or nuances of your team. So that's one thing to remember. So, since we're on this topic of a study selection, I thought I would share some of my thought process when it comes to reviewing a new protocol. So, I sort of have divided the review into three categories. So, that is a review of the sponsor, review of the study, and a site review. So, first, for the sponsor review, I typically start with a sort of a brief research on the company. So the sponsor could be a prominent, well-known, pharmaceutical corporation, or it could be a smaller company or small CRO that, just starting out and trying to establish their footprint in the industry. So if you are interacting with a relatively small or new company, I would say that, I recommend that you spend a little more time sort of try to learn about the company and understand the background and so on. So, you know, figure out have they ever submitted a new drug application to Health Canada or other regulatory bodies such as FDA? Or are there any other trials that are currently underway? If that's the case, how are those are progressing? Or you might have previously worked with this particular pharmaceutical company that you already know that have positive experience, and that's a really good encouraging indicator. After conducting sort of a preliminary research on the company, I would proceed to evaluate the study itself. So websites such as clinicaltrials.gov is a good place to start. So from that page, you can see sort of lists of all the active study sites in a global level or a national level. Let's say if you have a study, if you happen to see that the study appears active in one particular geographic area, but not the other. So, maybe you will see so many sites listed under US, but then you don't see none in Canada. You should be asking why. So it is possible that, maybe your site is the first one for them to approach. But then you have to think of other possibility that what is it about the study that may not quite align or not so appealing to the Canadian healthcare system? You have to ask these questions and you have to definitely pose these questions to this company as well and inquire what are the possible challenges, what am I facing here. Another important detail I always ask to the potential sponsor is that their recruitment goal, their timeline, and their current status of a global recruitment. It is crucial to have that information upfront because you wouldn't want to be investing so many hours of your study approval and only to find out that you end up having less than 6 months or less than a year for patient recruitment and enrollment. So, and this information becomes more critical if you are working on a study with a competitive enrollment scenario. The last step that involves a review of protocol with respect to the site-specific considerations. So it is essential that you conduct thorough review of the study inclusion-exclusion criteria and see if the targeted patient group could potentially be overlapping with any other active studies. And we have to think about how that could affect patient access to the trial and overall patient experience, and also your internal recruitment strategies. Staffing is another crucial element to consider. So uh, do you currently have the workforce capacity to handle an additional trial? Where do you foresee the need for more support if you decide to undertake on more studies? It is also essential to reach out to the support department to determine their availability and willingness to support the study. So as you may know, the study protocols are ever becoming more complex and resource intensive these days, which obviously has direct impact on other departments and their workload and availability. So I always highly recommend for any research teams to notify and work with the support department, let them know, sort of give them a heads up that these are the type of study that we're considering lately. Keeping them informed is always important. Even if your study end up not pursuing, not moving forward, it also helps sort of prevent unforeseen challenges down the line. So all that, long explanation. So to summarize, my practical tip when it comes to study selection and review process is that as mentioned already, that always remember that sponsor feasibility does not equate to site feasibility. You have to really do your own review, consider all the regional and local aspect of where you are. And it's also highly recommended that you should develop an internal study feasibility review checklist or some sort of procedure in place, and then keeping the record of incoming studies as well. It's good to have a sort of designated staff to assist the review and selection process. Um, Maybe you want to have that discussion during your routine research staff meeting, and that might be a good place where you start conversation and introducing some of the upcoming studies to your research team members and getting their feedbacks, of course. So now you have done your sort of extensive review on the sponsor, the protocol, and your team, and it seemed to be a good fit for your team. So you submitted the request to the sponsor for their review, and you get a notice saying that your site has been selected. So that's a good news. That's very exciting. And what would be the next step? And I think that's everyone's favorite, which is the ethics submission. So I want to talk a little bit about whose approval are you seeking. So in New Brunswick, if you were to run a clinical trial, there are three sort of folds to the study approval process, and those are institutional approval, we have ethics approval, and a legal financial approval. So I'll sort of briefly explain all those points. So we have, as many of you know already, we have Human Research Protection Program, which became effective as of July 1st, 2018. The HRPP was approved by Horizon leadership because it was recognized that research oversight required more coordinated organizational approach. So the intent is to ensure that all research studies meet the requirements for methodology, regulatory compliance, and privacy and ethical conduct. And it is also meant to provide access to education training for research teams and provide a quality oversight through the auditing program. So why was Horizon developed? Why did Horizon develop HRPP? There are many parts to protecting participants' right in research. So HRPP ensures shared responsibility between those parts. So as an example, before HRPP, we were finding that some of the studies were initiated without data sharing agreements in place. And this could be a problem because, even with RAB approval, the organization as a custodian is obligated under legislation to enter into an appropriate agreement for data release. Or in the context of clinical trials, there might be incidences where study receives approval from research ethics board, but then the investigator, the research team are not quite ready to move along with execution. The reason for that is they haven't quite addressed the actual operational logistics needed to proceed with the execution of the study. So, by establishing HRPP, we're really looking into reviewing the operation side of all this and creating sort of a shared system of a communication between all the entities, between institution, REB, and investigators to be responsible for the conduct of research. So when you submit a study to our HRPP, these are some of the really high-level review criteria that we go through. So the reviewer ensures that the study plan that you're proposing meets the regulatory and ethical requirements. Also, we want to make sure that your plan is compliant with the privacy regulations and adheres with the institutional policies. If your study is investigator initiated, then our methodologists will be conducting methodology review to ensure that the design of the study is appropriate to answer your research question. We also confirm that there is adequate resource, the funding, staffing to support the study. And then finally, we review the credentials and training of all the staff members involved in the study. So once the HRPP review is complete, the study application is then forwarded to the Research Ethics Board for their review. So in this process, the review focus is slightly different from HRPP review in ways that REB bases their review framework based on Tri-Council policy. So specifically, the core principles of Tri-Council TCPS2, which are respect for persons, concern for welfare, and justice. So I'll just briefly go through them. So for respect for persons is to ensure that participants are treated as autonomous agents, and those with diminished autonomy are provided with appropriate protections. And this criteria will often encompasses informed consent, ensuring that participant understands the research prior to consenting, and also participation is voluntary. Concern for welfare means that avoiding exposure participants to unnecessary risks. So that requires consideration of the physical, mental, and spiritual health of the participant, as well as their physical, economic, and social circumstances. Justice is to ensure that there's a fair distribution of the benefits and burdens of the research. um, they look at whether the certain populations being unfairly targeted for research or unfairly excluded from their benefits as well. So as you can see here, it's quite evident that the review angle between the REB versus HRPP is quite distinct, and they're different from coming from different perspectives. While your study's undergoing HRPP and REB review, our budget and contract office will be reviewing a document called Clinical Trial Agreement, also known as CTA. So CTA is a legally binding contract between the parties involved in a clinical trial. So we have typically it will be sponsor of the trial and also the institution or the site where the trial will be conducted. So it's the CTA outlines multiple things. So roles and responsibilities, and sort of expectations of each party that and so some of the high level ones that I would just kind of briefly mention them would be there will be a scope of work, financial terms, so specifies funding arrangement, payment schedule, terms for extra costs or financial reporting requirements. There may be a section regarding publication rights, that addresses the rights of investigators and sponsor regarding publishing trial results, confidentiality section. There may be an indemnification section that specifies who is responsible for legal and financial consequences in case of a damages, injuries, or legal disputes. There may be a section on audits and inspection rights that states that the conditions under which the sponsor or regulatory agencies can inspect a trial and trial site and also the data. There may be a terms for termination. There will be a section on regulatory compliances that mentions that the trial will be conducted in a compliance with local regulation, international standards such as GCP guidelines. Um, yeah, so really the content, this is really some of the one, not all of it, obviously. It's more of a broad category that I just kind of mentioned, that it will be specific to the type of study that you're involved in, and also the sponsor that that you work with as well. If you would like more information or need help with the submission to ethics, and here's some of the list of resources that's available for you. Um, I am aware that some of you, this call may not have access to Skyline, but I'll be more than happy to share a document called the Manual for Researchers. Useful if you are new to the Romeo platform, that explains how to navigate the application. There's also a link that talks about how to navigate certain features. We have a short video clip available on YouTube as well. So we have our email down on the screen as well. So now that you have obtained study approval, and what's next step? So you have your ethics approval, you have your contract signed off, and you will most likely be contacted by study sponsor or a company CRO or CRA, clinical research associate representing the company, asking to schedule a visit called SIV. SIV stands for Site Initiation Visit. So now I would like to spend a few minutes talking about SIV. So before COVID, I think a lot of SIVs tend to happen in person setting. But since the COVID, I noticed that most SIVs are now happening virtual setting. So around the time of SIV, there's also events called investigators meeting sometimes. What it is that it is an event that's organized by the sponsor, where they have all the site investigators around the world and coordinators in one location and provide really comprehensive training session on all the aspects about their study. So it's really educational and great opportunity to learn about the study. It is also possible that you may have missed that event due to the different timelines. So when that happens, you can always ask your sponsor for a copy of that meeting material, and for self-learning, or even request a separate education session. So this material is really helpful in a way that you could use that could be useful resource for staff who's joining your team later on. So SIV tends to be more, I would say, more very site specific. So going into more deeper focus on the operational details of relevant items that are at the site level. So I have listed really some of the questions that are frequently asked about the SIV. So when is SIV scheduled? As I said, it's usually scheduled right after the full execution of your study contract and your ethics approval, and before your sponsor giving you a green light to go ahead with the first patient. Who schedules it? It's usually scheduled by between your sponsor and also the site PI and coordinator. How long is the visit? It used to be quite a lengthy event, could be a day or half a day, but I think nowadays becoming really short, because the fact that it's happening virtually could be a few hours, several hours. The arrangements that you need to make before for SIV would be that, if it happens in person, obviously you have to think of the meeting space and what's needed in terms of equipment, projector, screen, conference call line or laptop, whatever it might be. Another important thing is attendee list. So have that discussion with your sponsor or CRA to make sure who they want to meet. For that visit. So maybe a pharmacist, could be a diagnostic imaging person, could be a lab person, could be a research nurse. So reach out to those individuals and make sure that they are available to attend the event. Another important thing that I always remind to the coordinator is that, you know, you as a coordinator have been working on that study for the last 9 months to make that SIV happen. But for pharmacists or diagnostic imaging person, they have not seen the study or haven't heard about the study for the last 9 months or even longer. So it is possible, very possible, that attending this SIV may not be their priority. So reminder email would be really helpful. Some of the documents or topic of discussion during that visit would be that there are actually a lot of documents that they will be reviewed and discussed during that visit. So there will be definitely a heavy focus on the review of the regulatory documents and essential documents. Um, you have to think of the main purpose of the visit. Really, the purpose of visit is to confirm that your site has the confidence to conduct the study according to the protocol and in compliance with regulatory requirements. So to confirm that, um, sponsor would like to make sure that you have all the operational plans and details worked out, that everyone involved is sufficiently trained and in their delegated roles and responsibility. So anything that supports that objective will be reviewed by sponsor representative. Also wanted to remind you that, SIV is really excellent opportunity for you to ask questions. Um, I would say I would even go as to say that you have to have some questions prepared for them, because having questions means that it means that you are really engaged with that new study, that you're really willing to ask question and have that open conversation about the study. So that's always a good sign, a good indicator for a sponsor. The most SIVs that I have been taking part of, like the first discussion of topic that typically brought up by the sponsor is the roles and responsibilities, as well as the internal communication plan. So, by this point, I would expect that, each member of the research team is well aware of their designated roles and responsibilities. Um, so really the straightforward way to clarify that question would be by referring to the document called Delegation of Authority or Task Delegation Log. So, Delegation of Authority Log is one of the essential documents in clinical trials. And in the log, the PI, the principal investigator, delegates, assigns study specific duties to a different members of the research team. So, um, each task is associated with a start date, it has the end date, and requires the signatures from both parties, so PI and the person who's been assigned to. If there's an event that team member carries out a certain task without having the proof of delegation, this is viewed as a significant protocol violation and violation of a GCP. So as you can see in this diagram here, that the clinical trials in clinical trials, there are multiple individuals and departments, group members who play a significant roles for their research, assigned research studies. But it's important to remember that there is only one person who holds that ultimate responsibility for all the activities that are going on during the study execution and management period, and that person is principal investigator. So given our time constraints, I don't think I'll be able to delve into really details about all the list of investigative responsibilities, but I thought maybe I should still emphasize few key responsibilities that are commonly scrutinized during regulatory inspections and sponsor monitoring visits. So as you can see here, the PI should ensure that each research team members clearly understand their scope of practice and responsibilities. PI should ensure the evidence of a delegation, also ensure the evidence of appropriate education and training. One important point that I would like to emphasize more is the evidence of PI oversight. So PI oversight is something that most frequently reviewed and most problematic, I would say, when it comes to health Canada inspection. So in these boxes, I have outlined some of the primary areas of a study operation that really requires proof of investigator oversight. So when I say proof, I am referring to the need for documentation. So documented evidence that shows the investigator's active participation in each of these study procedure, and that the PI has had a hand in decision-making processes. You want to have that documentation available for the reviewers and inspectors. So documented evidence of a training and qualification is very important. And let's say you have a SOP written up and finalized. The next step would be to provide opportunity for training. So you may be hosting or taking part in SOP training or protocol training, whatever it might be. There's different ways that you can conduct these trainings. So in case, as an example, in case of protocol training, protocol review during routine research meeting might be something that you might want to consider, or it could be done during lunch hour meeting, could be email communication where you sort of provide short summary of study synopsis. And also you may consider creating a summary and have it available in clinic for staff to review if those staff need that training. So really have to try to be more creative and flexible in a way that how you deliver the message, how you train your staff and have that documented, process documented. Um, so lastly, what about investigator-initiated studies? So I kind of see this topic as sort of a whole another topic because when it comes to investigator-initiated studies, there's a lot more to it, you know. So something like protocol development, including patient engagement in a protocol development and review and study design, registering your clinical trials, and also the actual protocol write-ups. And those are really interesting and important topics when it comes to investigator-initiated studies. So I wouldn't be able to cover all that topic today, but I would recommend that I hope to cover it some other sessions. So we have a monthly session called Research Quality Matters session that I host monthly basis once or twice a month. So if you are interested, feel free to let me know. I'll be more than happy to add you to my mailing list. And this is some of the tools and resources that I thought I would share with you in case you're looking for some other additional resources. This is end of my presentation. I thank you for attention and time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stella. Do we have any questions? No. I think you answered most of the questions that I submitted to you or asked online. So again, I guess thank you for the very informative presentation on clinical trials initiation and providing the details of HRPP, patient selection, institutional policies, and much more. I appreciate everyone's time this evening, and don't forget to share this video when available with your friends and colleagues to watch. And yeah, thank you again for the knowledge. I'll be sending the live, or not the live, sorry, the recorded session to everybody here and to anybody that missed it. And this will be available on YouTube and on our website. Perfect.
Well, yeah, thank you. Thanks
Thank you
for
so
the
much,
opportunity.
Stella. Thanks.
No
Take